Voilà. Ensuite, start recording. Okay. Bonjour tout le monde, bonjour.
Comment?
We have started photo profile.
Okay. Yes, dear colleagues, I hope that you can hear me. I don't ask to copy or to tell me that everything is okay, because I see that you all followed the rules and you put yourself on mute as long as you don't have anything to contribute. So I am very happy to welcome you all around the world and here in Bern to our seminar on gender equality and foreign policy, and to the question which challenges can we expect, or which challenges do we have to cope when it comes to COVID and gender equality. It has been a long time for me that last time I could participate in such or in a similar debate, because unfortunately this year's couple of this year's seminars did not work. Among others, also our annual meeting in New York, where we usually discuss these kind of things. But it was my first big issue that I had to cancel, my first big meeting that I had to cancel because of COVID. Our last meeting to prepare our trip to New York was the moment when I realized that things were really going to change for a long time. So thank you very much for joining us. I warmly welcome you to today's FDFA Gender Network Meeting. The first ever in this format. The last Gender Network Meeting, we all had enough space in one of these rooms here at the 240 in Bern. Your participation in such high numbers shows that wide interest for gender equality issues within our department, but also its importance as a transversal topic in our foreign policy. And I am very pleased that you're all here. Also, some of our heads of mission, and especially it's a great pleasure for me to have today with us Patricia Stanzi, our Director General of the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, SDC, and Christine Löw, our Director of EU and Women Liaison Office in Geneva. So thank you very much for joining us today. I think the ground rules, you're already familiar with the ground rules of teleworking and teleconferencing. Please make sure that your video is off and that your microphone is muted unless you are given the floor. Do not use the video if possible, and if you have any technical issues, please use the chat channel to communicate with us. Our colleagues here are ready and happy to help and to assist. So the COVID crisis has made the year 2020 a challenging one for all of us. It has somewhat changed the way we live and work right across the world, and is facing and forcing us all to constantly adapt. It's kind of a very different situation in which we find ourselves here around the virtual table, whereas here in Bern, things seem to normalize more. I know that some and many of our colleagues here and in other parts of the world are still in a very difficult situation, doing a great job. And that's also the opportunity I want to take to thank you all for what you are doing all day long. The FDFA has had to adapt ongoing bilateral projects and programs within our budget, but also our government was able to organize some more funds. Our Parliament approved it recently. COVID-19 has highlighted existing discrimination and inequalities in all societies. We know now that this is not impacting everyone equally. How do we take that fully into consideration into our foreign policy, and what are the main challenges to that topic? We have joined other states' efforts to promote a gender-responsive approach in the fight against COVID-19 through a ministerial declaration signed by Federal Councillor Cassis. What steps have we taken, and what more should be done to make this a reality? During our meeting, we would like to put all of these issues on the table and unpack them together. We will hopefully find out more about how our development cooperation and humanitarian aid have started to adapt to ensure that gender equality is part of our response, but also to take into account women's needs, responsibilities, and perspectives. We are also keen to learn about UN Women's experience and expertise in that regard. During the discussion part that will follow both presentations, we look forward to hearing about colleagues themselves, including abroad. What are the main issues that you see arising in the different areas of our foreign policy, and how do you think we should face them? All of your insights and guidance on approaches or actions will be very interesting to all of us and will get the topic moving. So let us start with the presentations. We will first give the floor to Patricia Danzi, and then followed by Christine Löw, and then we will have two short and brief interventions from the field, from Bosnia and Herzegovina and from Jordan. And then finally, we will move on with a discussion and a Q&A session. I stop here. Again, I'm really looking forward to the next 80 minutes. Thank you again for joining. You were the lucky or the fast 100. We have another 150 and counting that we had to tell that we're already fully booked. But we will, if we can, then we will record the whole meeting and then put it on intranet to make it available to everybody else. So I'm here to thank also my colleagues from the Secretary General's Office of Equality for preparing, organizing this session and making it possible. Thank you again, and Patricia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Marcus. Thanks to everyone, and I'm very, very honored to be part of this network now and have been invited to this meeting. Maybe just as a small introduction, what does the topic represent for me? How did I live through it, through my life, and what were the key moments in my life that shaped me also in this regard? Maybe the first thing was when I was recruited to this position, I Googled my panel and I saw Marcus's name on it. I Googled the person, and the first thing that sprang up was Gender and Equality Forum somewhere, and you gave a speech. So I was like, wow, that will maybe increase my chance to get recruited. So it was an interesting thing to see. Further down, there were other things about you, but that was the start here. Now, when I was a young girl, I had a grandmother, Swiss grandmother. I grew up a couple of years with her, and I actually realized how empowerment of women can change someone's life. She had to go every day to my grandfather's office, that was in the same house, to ask for 20 Swiss francs to go and buy food. I found that not very inspiring, and we kind of found out ways to get more money, to get also the biscuits and the cookies for me. But every day she had to do this. She later inherited a lot of money, and she started swimming lessons, yoga classes, and that was only the first thing. She also asked my grandfather to fill in her voting envelope herself, because she had the right to vote in a couple of years then. But she didn't actually vote. because she was not empowered to, and she gave the whole affair to my grandfather. She then started a small business in the house, and she became a different woman. So this was kind of a blueprint to what many of us do try to do when we say empowerment of women. We do maybe something, we help her to open up a store, or to help her do other things, and it has a lot of impact on self-confidence and has other loops that we don't even have an idea what it means. It's also an important thing to create this moment of empowerment. We need, of course, men to help us get where we want to be, but moments like the gathering of women, and some of you on that list participated last week on the Spanish ambassadors gathering at her residence. It is a very strong moment to be about 30, 40 women gathering around, exchanging topics, and you feel stronger when you get out of it. Another one was 1 year ago when I went to Geneva, and we had this big demonstration about equal rights and whatnot, and I really came out of it stronger than I entered into it. I didn't expect it. It just made me more self-confident and made me proud to achieve things. And I think this is something that's not measurable, but it can never be underestimated. Let me maybe come closer to the topic of today. What happened over the last 2-3 months to women during the COVID crisis? And I include also everyone around the table, the virtual table that is connected today. The first thing that also the Secretary General said, and I truly believe that he is a man who believes in gender equality, lives it and promotes it. He said the domestic violence and the violence against women increased. Now, already in normal times, you have 1 out of 3 women that faces sexual or other sorts of violence, and it has not decreased over these 2-3 months, and maybe probably continues in many of the contexts where we work. The issue is, it is behind closed doors. Less people watch, less women can go to shelters, so the exposure of this phenomena has increased a lot. What we also see, which we don't have data either, is the risk of infection, the risk of health services for women, because you have to stay home, because the health center only treats this and this patient, because access is more difficult, and not to forget the loss of income. Many women work in the informal sector, and if you can't go out about your business, you can't go to the market, you can't sell your goods, then you don't have the money. And because women have a lot to carry when it comes to education, when it comes to providing food, when it comes to basic issues that relate to the family, the income loss is a very, very serious thing, because it goes with the loss of many other things. It's not only the money, it goes with loss of many other things. Did you ever think about your cleaning lady, housemaid, if she can still come, or did she come while the crisis was on? Mine didn't. And she was in Geneva, and she said, I'm too afraid to come. It's not that she didn't want, I couldn't oblige her to come, although I would have loved to, but she was too afraid, and I didn't. But she didn't have regular income for many people, and that was in Switzerland. So we can only imagine what this means in many of the contexts that we live and that we work. You have definitely seen that with your own children, with your nephews and cousins, they didn't go any longer to school. Well, here we have online school education, more or less continued in a regular way, but for many millions of kids, they didn't have any chance to do this. Not only because you don't have an online equipment, because you don't have any light at home to connect it, even if you had Wi-Fi. So I have one of my stepmothers, she's a teacher in Nigeria, and she said, well, I'm out of business because I can no longer teach. I don't have any students to teach because they're no longer connected. So I don't know what I will find when I go back to school in August, but definitely not a lot of people have studied if the school goes on, and if the girls can go back to school, and if the families have the money, or the families have the money to pay the education and to bring up the school fees, which is another issue. So you see there is also the question of working from home. If your kids, if they have the online equipment, but you have to at the same time be a teacher and do your ordinary job, it's not an easy thing to do if you're in a small apartment and if you don't have any way to have them go out and play in the garden. Now, what did we do with this? We have realized it. Some of us have realized it on our own, in our own environment, and we have tried to ensure a twofold approach. One is to implement and to include the gender perspective of what we have done. And I have gone through the list of the participants here on that online seminar, and you may want to also give us an example of how you actually did it. We have looked into reproductive health, gender-based violence in places like Tanzania, but also in Myanmar, and we have tried, when we do health, we have had Bosnia and Herzegovina that will give us an example shortly, and to also raise the awareness with governments, what does it mean for women all the time when we do reprogramming of many of the programs that we have already started. We have done it also through the multilateral, that's the second angle, the multilateral approach with UN Women, but with the UN system at large and with WHO to make sure that women's issues are part of the response and part of the rebalancing. The aim of this, the main aim was we have, with a long effort that's not over, I've gained some ground. Not a lot, but it's like two steps forward, one step back. And at the moment, we had the impression that we were actually moving 3 steps back and 2.5 at maximum forward. So we're still losing ground. So in the next month, in the next years, and in the next maybe even decade, we have to make sure we catch up from where we were, and then make again headway to where we want to be. And all the programming that we do, the efforts that we have, must go into that direction. I salute the efforts that have been done by many of you and the teams on the ground. It was not an easy endeavor, because also our counterparts are still or have been away, locked down, not available. So anything that we wanted to do, to see for ourselves, was not necessarily possible to do. But I will stop here also to give the opportunity to the people connected to tell us the reality of what you live and how maybe we can do better over the next couple of months as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I'm happy to hear that sometimes if you Google, or if I'm Googled, then other things appear than the usual adventures that I went through. And I think it is absolutely true, and I think Christine can only confirm that already last year we said what you said before. We were kind of losing ground, and we tried to stop, and now we got COVID, making things probably not better. Christine, may I give you the floor?
Thank you very much, Secretary General Seiler, Director General Dancy, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for the invitation to this timely discussion on a theme that is key for the world to successfully and sustainably recover from COVID-19 pandemic. And also for inviting me to share UN Women's experience with the COVID pandemic. I would like to thank you for the leadership, also for holding a internal seminar or webinar with the Department for Foreign Affairs on this important issue. Next slide, please. Before turning to UN Women's response to the COVID pandemic, I would like to say a few words about the current context in which this crisis unfolds. The international community is currently on a trajectory towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals through the implementation of the 2030 Agenda by the year 2030. And the 2030 Agenda is in fact clear. It says that there can be no sustainable development without gender equality. However, the data shows that gender inequalities are pervasive in every dimension of sustainable development, and progress has been slow and uneven. In fact, unless progress on gender equality is accelerated, the global community will fail to achieve the SDGs by 2030. And it is in this context, and Secretary General Seiler has said it is in this context that the COVID pandemic has hit the world. The pandemic is a profound shock to our societies and economies, and as Director General Danti has already mentioned, the impact and implication of COVID-19 are different for men and women. In fact, the pandemic underscores the society's reliance on women both on the front line and at home. It simultaneously exposes structural inequalities across every sphere, from health to the economy, security to social protection. In times of crisis, when financial resources are strained and institutional capacity is limited, women and girls face disproportionate impacts with far-reaching consequences that are further amplified in context of fragility, conflict and emergency. There is a high risk that COVID-19 will reverse the progress that has been made on gender equality and women's rights. So responding to the pandemic is therefore also an opportunity to rectify long-standing inequality and to build a resilient world in the interest of everyone, with women at the center of the recovery. Next slide, please. Now, how has UN Women responding to the COVID-19 pandemic? I think it's the slide before. Yes. UN Women, like the whole UN system, has pivoted all its activities towards the COVID-19 response. Our response is part of the broader UN-wide response and includes policy advice and programmatic interventions. At the outset of the pandemic, with planned meetings postponed and projects stalled, UN Women carried out an exercise of reprogramming works and resources in order to contribute to the COVID-19 response. To guide the programming, UN Women developed a framework for the gender-responsive prevention and management of the COVID-19 pandemic. This framework identifies the key issues on COVID-19 and gender and establishes the organization's response accordingly. The framework focuses on 3 priority areas, which is gender-based violence, including domestic violence, social protection and economic stimulus packages, and the equal sharing of care work. Women and girls' leadership and participation in the response planning and decision-making, as well as gender-sensitive data and coordination mechanisms, are cross-cutting. They are important in all 3 fields. UN Women also carried out gender analysis on the various facets of COVID-19 and developed thematic policy briefs covering an analysis of the gender impact, key trends, and guidance on appropriate policy responses. I will be happy to share the web links to these resources after this webinar. We also put in place systems to gather sex disaggregated data on COVID-19 and its impact. Disaggregated data allows to really understand the specific experiences of different segments of the population and enables to develop tailor-made measures to effectively address the impacts of COVID-19. The gender data is also available in our COVID-19 section of our data hub. Finally, we're also running campaigns in order to raise awareness on COVID-19 and its effects on women's lives. One is called He for She at Home, and it seeks to inspire men and boys to help balance the burden of care in their household. Another one is the Shadow Pandemic on Domestic Violence campaign, which is focusing on what Ms. Dancy has already also described the global increase in domestic violence amidst the COVID-19 health crisis. Next slide, please. I will now turn to UN Women's role in the UN's response overall. UN Women have played a critical role in ensuring the gender responsiveness of the UN system-wide response to COVID. The diagram on this slide outlines the three pillars of the UN's response to COVID-19 in the humanitarian system, in health, and also the development system. UN Women is contributing to all three at the global and country level, ensuring that gender dimensions are adequately included in the programs and recommendations, and to collect sex-disaggregated data on COVID. UN Women was one of the 12 agencies of the UN development system that developed the UN Secretary General's socio-economic framework for the immediate response to COVID. This framework builds on the lessons learned during the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, when more people died from the interruption of social services and economic breakdown than from the virus itself. The framework therefore aims to ensure that people everywhere have access to social services and social protection, and that jobs, businesses and livelihoods are protected. It also establishes pathways towards a safe and equitable recovery of societies and economies, with the long-term goal of directing economies along a sustainable, gender-equal and carbon-neutral trajectory. Next slide, please. In addition to these efforts at the global level, UN Women's network of country offices worldwide is providing support at the national level. UN Women country offices are working with national and local governments, analyzing their specific needs, providing technical assistance, and developing guidance notes and protocols, and identifying best practices. Our country offices also advise our international development partner, of which Switzerland and the SDC is one, a very important one. I'm convinced that the Swiss cooperation offices and my colleagues are already in touch at the country level. Another very important part of our local work is the support to UN Women's NGO and community, women's NGOs and community-based organizations. In many countries, civil society organizations are the first responders to violence against women. They are providing shelters and essential services that would otherwise not be available. These organizations now need support because their work is affected by lockdown measures or by the reallocation of financial resources. And as you can see now, the concrete examples on the slide, that our response on the country level is very varied. So for instance, in Serbia, we have provided access to psychosocial support, safe houses and shelters for women who survived violence. Or in El Salvador, special subsidies are being provided to support women providing unpaid care services in response to COVID. Or else in South Africa, UN Women is offering a suite of virtual learning courses through online classrooms with partners such as Google and MTN, a telecom operator. UN Women is also mobilizing cash, essential supplies and food for those in need. For instance, in Lebanon, UN Women is utilizing the Cash for Work and Job Placement Program to provide unconditional cash transfer. Looking towards the long-term response, we are continuing to focus on programming that builds women's resilience for this and future shocks, so that they have the resources they need for themselves and for their families. Last slide, please. So to come back to the bigger picture, let me close with the following. I said even before the pandemic, we know it that no country has achieved gender equality. Gender equality is, however, a prerequisite to achieve the 2030 agenda and to realize its vision to end poverty, rescue the planet, and to build a peaceful world by 2030. To get back on track for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, it is critical for countries' COVID responses and recovery plans to be aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, putting women at the center, and design them to build back better. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christina, for these interventions from the long-term and strategic to the action in the field. You already built the bridge, and now we move on to two interventions from the field. We would start with a short intervention from Bosnia and Herzegovina with our colleagues Barbara Dattwiler-Scheurer, Deputy Head of Mission, and Almar Danovic, National Program Officer. Can I give you the floor, please? That looks like Regine.
I'm coming. Do you see me?
We hear you.
Okay, but you don't see me. Okay. I started 3 to some. Yeah, the techniques.
Perfect.
Do you see me now? Okay.
Yes.
Dobro. Okay. Thank you very much for giving us the platform to present to you how we at the Swiss Embassy in Sarajevo are dealing with the topic of gender equality and what we did also in times of COVID-19. I'm personally working since 25 years on gender equality, actually since I was gender focal point at UNDP in Palestine. A lot has changed since then, but not always as I had wished. But one thing has changed. Today, our gender focal point at the Swiss Embassy is a man, Albir Danovic, and he's with me and he's very engaged. Bosnia and Herzegovina is a highly patriarchal society where stereotypes on the roles of women still prevail. Here only 7 out of 143 mayors are women. Working on gender equality therefore remains extremely relevant. Almir and I keep the topic high on the agenda. We sensitize, raise awareness, discuss and challenge on the root causes of gender inequality, on harmful gender stereotyping, and also on gender-sensitive language. The COVID-19 pandemic reached Bosnia and Herzegovina by mid-March, and the governments introduced lockdown measures immediately. Soon it became clear that the pandemic affects all aspects of life and that the impact of the pandemic is not gender neutral. So here are some of our observations. First, having very few women in leadership positions meant that also during the state of emergency, the needs of women were probably not adequately addressed. Second, women, making up 72% of the health workforce, were pushed to the front lines in primary health care, often without appropriate support. Then 3, the reduced access to health services, including to reproductive health care, affected women more than men. 4, the closure of schools and the fact that elderly people above 65 were not allowed to leave their home put additional pressure on women who did 3 times as much unpaid care work as men. 5, isolation and psychosocial stress led to a sharp increase in domestic violence. We already heard it today. Safe houses in Bosnia and Herzegovina reported 60% more calls in April compared to March. 6, more than 10% of female journalists lost their income. Most of them stated that their mental stability has been affected. 7, women were often working in sectors that had to shut down during the crisis, for example in textiles. And 8, 70% of women-owned small businesses had to stop their activities due to a lack of liquidity and the inability to sell their products and services. So with all this in mind, I reached out to our partner organizations with a letter. I asked them to take into account the gender dimensions of COVID-19 in their work and to ensure that the pandemic does not increase vulnerabilities and inequalities. I also asked them to identify innovative approaches that could protect women from bearing the heaviest brunt of the crisis. This letter was good, but not enough. Thus, Almir organized 3 mini-online workshops to further discuss the issue. The workshops were also an opportunity for our partners to share their experience and best practices. Flexible work arrangements or virtual training opportunities, for example. We ourselves at the Swiss Embassy also provided support to 2 safe houses, and we also used our Facebook page to create more awareness, and we took this topic up with policymakers. Probably we will see the real impact of COVID-19 only in the months to come. We will have to be very attentive, and we might have to adapt some of our projects. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, elections will take place in November. Everything is delayed, and I'm really scared that women candidates will have fewer possibilities to present themselves. Therefore, jointly with 2 local civil society organizations, we are preparing for a campaign. The campaign aims to challenge people's voting patterns, and it motivates them, should motivate the voters to elect more women in public offices. It will portray women politicians as strong, successful leaders capable of delivering tangible and positive changes regardless of their party affiliation. This might sound familiar to you. Yes, we are proud to work with Andreas Staka, a Swiss Bosnian-Croatian filmmaker who directed the spots for the campaign Helvetia ruft. You remember that? I hope that the campaign in Bosnia and Herzegovina will be as successful as the one in Switzerland, despite COVID-19, and we will keep you updated. Now, Alvira will give you a very short insight into one of our most successful projects, the Young Men Initiative. We support this project because we are convinced that if you want to reach gender equality, you have to engage men and boys as agents of change. Thank you very much. Over to you, Almire.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm trying to turn on my videos. Okay, I think good. Yeah. Thank you, Barbara. Greetings to all. I'm pleased to give you this brief introduction of our project with CARE International. Since 2014, Switzerland has been contributing to the CARE International and its local partners project Young Men Initiative. This project focuses on prevention of gender-based violence, fighting gender stereotypes, and promotion of healthy lifestyles among youth. Peer education program developed through this project has reached thousands of boys and girls in Bosnia and Herzegovina and became in official use in many secondary schools with the potential for future scaling up. One of the unique interventions is BMN clubs. Established across the country, they gather hundreds of boys and girls as an agent of change. They promote non-stereotype image of young men who are aware of gender inequalities, able to recognize stereotypes and deal with the challenges imposed by their society. As one of the members said, BMN Club is not an ordinary club. It's a way of life without fear and shame. Club members use social networks, street actions, culture, and other youth-friendly tools to reach, engage, and educate their peers and communities. Evidence shows that young men who were exposed to the project activities generally have more gender-equitable attitudes and decreased use of violence against women and against their peers. The pandemic interrupted many activities, but our partners and young people quickly adapted. BMN Club continued to meet through Zoom application. Their members offered young people counseling and education session with advices how to deal with the quarantine and anger, how to share responsibilities at home, and recognize gender-based violence. Project partners and BMN Club developed videos, podcasts, and other visual tools on gender equality and mental health of youth. They also shared them through social media. They used already existing tools, such as Men Care Switzerland's Corona Crisis Survival Kit for Men Under Pressure. We strongly believe that this gender transformative work with young men will have positive impact on gender equality in the long run. Thank you very much, and please contact me if you need any additional information.
Thank you so much, Barbara and Almir. Very impressive, and thank you for giving us an insight in your daily work on the ground. And I'll pass the floor on to Amand, to Sabine Rosenthaler-Sherman, Deputy Head of the Development Corporation, and Raida Nimrod, National Program Officer.
So, good afternoon. This is Sabine speaking. Can you see me now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. I would just like to briefly introduce Raida Nimrod, our regional gender focal point. She will talk to you about the impact of the rather harsh measure of the Jordanian government to keep the COVID crisis manageable or under control, because in Jordan we do not have that many cases. We have an accumulated number of about 1,000 cases and current figures of 200 to 300 cases, and the main cases, they really come from the bordering countries or Jordanians coming back, just that you have an understanding. She will particularly focus on the needs of the Syrian refugees. There are about 1.3 million Syrian refugees living in Jordan, 20% of them in the camps and 80% in host communities. So please, Raida, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much, Sabine, and hello, everyone. So, do you see me? Yes?
We hear you, but we don't see you, so the most important part is okay. We can hear you.
I don't know what's wrong, but I have the camera on anyway. So, yes, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to present Jordan's experience during the COVID-19 response, and also how SDC responded to the situation. Actually, I would like to give a brief on how the government response was sensitive or not sensitive to gender needs, and also to focus a bit on the role of the women's organizations during this response, and actually the remarkable role during this response and how they advocated to make the response more gender sensitive. So first, just an overview about how the response was organized. So the government established a national response plan led by the Prime Minister Office and the National Center for Crisis Management, and has taken, like other countries, a set of measures to address the spread of the virus. However, Jordan's COVID-19 response revealed Jordan's gender-related flaws at different levels. And according to several assessments which shed light on the impact of the crisis on vulnerable Syrian refugee and also Jordanian women across the country, the crisis has resulted in an increase of violence in the household, economic insecurity and less access for women to government support, and also interruption for judicial system, which now I would like to elaborate more on these 3 points. So concerning domestic violence, according to a study conducted by UNFPA, 69% of respondents, including Syrian refugee in camps, agreed that gender-based violence has increased since the pandemic started, and emotional and physical abuse were the most commonly reported. The Jordanian National Commission for Women's Rights and other civil society organizations received significantly more calls on the related hotline. Before the crisis, women were able to communicate with their relatives, with their close network. However, as we know, during the crisis, women or GBV survivors were stuck within the house with their perpetrators. Here, just to highlight how the women's organizations actually intervened and provided the government with several recommendations related this issue and domestic violence. So actually they recommended the government to establish one hotline for the survivors of GBV, because during the crisis the government started to establish different governmental platforms in order to support the vulnerable people. But in order to make the response really gender sensitive, this recommendation came from the Jordanian National Commission for Women in order to establish one hotline to make the reach out for the survivors as easy as possible. Second, actually they also recommended that family protection departments in the refugee camps to be deployed, because during the crisis, the work of the family protection departments which deal with situations of violence was stopped. So they recommended that they need to deploy and to establish these units inside the camps, and also to put more women police officers in the camps. Also the need to adequately staff the family protection departments across the kingdom with staff that be available to provide the services for the survivors. Also during there was a recommendation that the government should start a media campaign against domestic violence. However, the government was, I would say, reluctant or afraid of a political backlash, and therefore didn't make such statements during the daily press releases. And actually here I would like to quote what the General Secretary of the Jordanian National Commission for Women said when there was an interview with her, and she mentioned that when I say something about domestic violence on Twitter, people start commenting and say, why are you talking about this in the middle of a health crisis? Because issues of women's rights and gender equality will be put aside, and they will prioritize the response for the health, of course. A second point that I would also like to mention is related to economic insecurity and access to government support packages. So related to the support packages that the government distributed among poor people in the beginning of the lockdown, only workers in the formal sector were recognized by the social protection system. Women who work in informal sector like cooking at home and sell their food were thus not eligible for support packages. A second issue was that at the beginning also of the lockdown, the government distributed groceries rather than cash to households in the beginning. However, the government didn't take into account women's needs, such as women hygiene products and contraception. And again, the role of women's organizations was here active and important, and they advised the government of the situation, making sure that workers in the informal sector can request support as well. And after civil society organization made the government aware about this, authorities started to give cash support so that households could buy products for themselves. Also, an issue was related to the interruption of services from the judicial system, and the fact that the judiciary was forced to stop working when the lockdown started impacted women. On the one hand, there are women who aim to legally divorce and are waiting, and they were waiting for courts to give them the divorce papers. Until they legally divorced, they didn't receive the amount of money or the alimony allocated for women after divorce, and can't register at National Aid Fund. So also these issues were taken by the women's organization, and the need to keep the work of the judiciary system continued.
Rita, I don't want to interrupt, but I have to ask you to come to an end because we want to give an opportunity to everybody else.
Yes, sorry to take more time. Also, so here I would like to speak about SDC response and how we responded. So for us in the embassy, we have worked closely with our partners to respond to the implications of the COVID-19, and based on the needs identified by our partners and considering the limitations on women's privacy and mobility, partners remotely adapted its provision of response and prevention services to meet GBV survivors' needs, and the services include remote case management and psychosocial support. We also, through our partners, enhance the protection of vulnerable households through the distribution of emergency cash assistance to most affected persons, specifically inside camps. And finally, one of our partners is now working on publishing a policy paper on the protection issues facing women and girls from all nationalities in Jordan during the COVID-19 crisis, to be shared with decision makers and activists. Yeah, so this is an overview about the response, the role of women's organization, and also how we cooperated with our partners to adopt the response for COVID-19. Thank you, and sorry to take more time.
No problem. Thank you so much, Rita. And I know it's always very difficult to be short when there's so many things going on. So thank you so much also to Sabine in Amman, and all the best for what's to come. Now I would like to thank again all the panelists here in Bern and in the field, and for this very inspiring and also not so easy input. And I would now like to open the discussion and to pass the floor to Regine and Corinne, who organized the Q&A session. And I would propose or suggest that those who want to speak should write their name in the chat, and so we will pass the floor in the order that you put your names in the chat room. And if time allows, we will do a wrap-up and look what's ahead of us. So please, Regine and Corinne.
Thank you, Marcus. And thank you, all colleagues, to have joined us today. We're going to try and keep this discussion Q&A efficient. This platform is really also a way for us to learn from one another. We at headquarters, we want to benefit from your expertise, so please go ahead and provide us with further examples, experiences, and views. We're interested in all areas of foreign policy. What about migration policy? What about peace and security? What about human rights policy? Have you seen any changes on the ground? Are you in touch with local actors? What have you learned? Any adaptations that you have made? We're interested in all of that. And I had a very first request for the floor already, but please go ahead and put your name on the chat so that we can give you the floor. And we will start with Dominique Favre, who is at the New York mission, who had requested the floor earlier, and we continue from there. We don't see any names yet, but because we have so many on this call, I'm sure that we'll get many, many insights from everywhere. Dominique, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Regine. Thank you very much for this excellent meeting and exchange. We are delighted here together with Valerie Wagner from the Mission of New York to see the commitment of all the institutions, all the entities of the department. We would also like to congratulate you all for the reaction that you gave to the gender response to COVID. I think what Patricia Danzi was presenting with the work with the WHO, with UN Women, with UNFPA is really key. At the moment, we have really to have these organizations in the forefront when it comes to build back better. Here in New York at the political level, Marcus, you know this very well, the situation is a bit more tense when it comes to defend the achievement of the Agenda 2030. We have countries like the US, like Russia, like Algeria, Saudi Arabia or Egypt who are somehow moving back from the agreed achievements we had in 2015. And one good illustration now is that there are two resolutions on the table, one from Spain and one from Egypt, that are blocking each one themselves here in New York as responses, as gender responses to COVID. So it makes the whole thing a bit more difficult. I don't want to be too long, but I was reflecting on what Christine said at the very end when it comes to build back better and what we could do here in New York and how we could work closer together with all of you here in this meeting. First of all, I think as the third committee is coming and next year at the CSW, Marcus, where we hope that you will be here again, we think that we need to be vocal. We have a fantastic 2017 gender strategy. We have to defend sexual and reproductive health and rights, and we have to engage in the negotiations related to this. Why do I say this? Because this sets the frame. This sets the frame in which then the funds and programs, the agencies that we are supporting with a lot of funds are working to achieve gender equality and reduce the inequalities that we see are exacerbated with the COVID crisis. The second, the funds and programs and the international financial institutions, they all have gender strategies, and we sit in the boards of these organizations and we adopt the gender strategies. So I think we should very strongly and very focusedly work together, headquarters, us here, and with examples from the field, to align and to change these strategies, that the Build Back Better will be a Build Back Better with a gender lens. The third point is the private sector. Christine, I would be glad if you could say a few words to the women's economic empowerment principles that together with UN Global Compact you were establishing. I think these are typically areas where we as Switzerland, willing to work closer together with the private sector, we could push for a significant gender move of the private sector. And the last point, this is something recurrent. We always try to convince colleagues from the fields, and it was really nice to listen to you now, that you maybe observe a bit the work of the funds and programs of UNFPA, of UNICEF, of the World Bank also, but of UNDP, maybe on their activities on gender, that you feedback this to us, because the CPDs, the country program documents, are also adopted here, and these are moments when we adopt them that we can still try to correct one or the other thing, while having sufficient like-minded countries supporting our proposals. So thanks again. We are very happy to be part of this round. Thanks. Back to you, Regine.
Thank you, Dominique, for these very important points. And we take with us the synergies between bilateral and multilateral work. And I think it's a very nice platform to have today to discuss this further. I've noted your 4 points. I suggest we take another question and comment, and then we go maybe back to, I note that we have a question for Christine, a specific one, and maybe reactions from our panelists. So we have Matebe Mary Chisiza from South Africa.
Hi. Thank you. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for putting this together. I think this is a very important and timely discussion, as well as the panelists for sharing the insights. I had a bit of a question as well as a comment on what is happening from my point of view in South Africa. So first off, the president addressed the nation last week and also really addressed the issues of rising gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa. So over the last 2 weeks, there has been approximately 25 girls that have been murdered as a result of femicide or gender-based violence in South Africa. And this has been an ongoing and is an increasing problem. And, you know, I also wanted to find out from your different experiences how best to engage government on such issues. So I know, for example, South Africa also does have a steering committee and a national command council that is focused specifically on addressing gender-based violence and the increase of gender-based violence specifically during COVID-19, as well as their response. And I must say I do commend them as well. There's been a really bottom-up approach as well as even a top-down approach in tackling these issues in the country. And there has been, with all the pandemic response, it has been done, from my knowledge, with a gendered perspective, which I haven't seen in too many countries also on the continent and worldwide. So in every engagement that they do, South Africa is committed to working towards ending gender-based violence and also bringing awareness to issues of femicide that are increasingly growing. However, this is still struggling, and it seems that the government is also not able to keep up this momentum, also with its own internal problems, specifically around in-party fighting, as well as corruption in terms of the allocation of PPEs and tenders that are around that. So here at the embassy in Pretoria, for example, we are trying to get involved, whereby in August, which is Women's Month in South Africa, we are organizing a webinar on women, peace and security. And the purpose of this webinar is also to give gendered perspective and highlights from the region on responses on COVID-19. So it would be really good as well, you know, if anyone is able to share more insights as well as best practices on how to carry out such a webinar. And I can share the concept note, which is already drafted, as well as a speaker list for anyone who might be interested. And yes, that is my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Matebe. I suggest that we maybe move back to the panel or back to Bern. And I really want to highlight what Dominique mentioned. The multilateral work sets the frame, and how does that link with the funds and programs, and the giving feedback from field offices to our multilateral actors and engagements. Let's start. Any reactions on this side from Madame Dancy or Christine Löw? So we start with Christine Löw. I see points. Okay.
I would like to thank you very much, and I'd like to thank Dominic for his question regarding the private sector. And so private sector, I would like to, I mean, he already gave, he started the answer. So there is, UN Women, together with the Global Compact, have developed the Women's Economic Empowerment Principles. It's a charter of 7 principles which which foster gender equality in the workplace, in the marketplace, and in the community. We have about 2,000 CEOs of large global companies that have signed up to these principles. They are voluntary principles, but that means that the gender strategies of these companies, they work towards implementing these principles. And now in the context of COVID, we use these principles also as a way to raise awareness of companies for the different challenges that women are confronted with, because the principles, they do actually really address issues that are also now aggravated. So, for instance, the whole question of flexible working models with part-time and so on are even more important now, because women are shouldering the main part of care work. The burden is in any case always triple to the time that men spend with unpaid care, and it has much increased. We have already heard this earlier. Another point, for instance, is also that women are in sensitive sectors now, as we see the layoffs and as the economy is shrinking. Women are often in manufacturing, but also the service sectors like tourism, hospitality, and retail. These are often sectors where there is no telecommuting modality possible. So they are losing jobs, which means also that this is an issue that we take up with the companies. And then the buying from women's businesses along the supply chain is also something. Women businesses are often micro or small businesses or enterprises. They are most vulnerable right now in a situation like an economic shock caused by a pandemic, and there again to raise awareness of the bigger companies to also buy from women-owned enterprises. And finally, the increased violence at home, especially at home when home becomes the workplace. That's also one of the reasons why we see increased violence, because more women are at home together with the family. There is tension, there is stress, which can cause the violence. And there again, even without the pandemic, this is an issue for businesses because it has a huge impact on the productivity of the employees, of female employees, even for the male employees. And in these times, it's very important also that companies are aware and that they provide platforms where employees can also ask for help and see how they can support them.
Maybe just a couple of words to what I heard and what I liked. I heard from Bosnia, but also from others, the fact that you try to reach out to our partners, to either the governments, partner organizations, NGOs, whoever is there who partnered with us to find solutions and to make them aware of what the new situation looks like, and give them the possibility to also then act. The second thing that I think is important that I've also heard is you don't stop there. You campaign on your own. Make sure you get the video spots out, the communication tools, you organize workshops, you use a month, the South African month of August, to talk about it and gather people around the issue. I think that's the second one, and then give the good example yourself. And I believe in each country, Jordan for sure, South Africa certainly, but also Bosnia, there is also a network of women in each country that we may also tap into. Sometimes they organize, sometimes not really, but they're definitely agents to ventilate the message and communicate further to what we want to communicate and what we want to raise awareness. Because here it's very much it's an approach that has different angles, and we will have to mobilize. We are a small country with a lot of resources and a lot of motivation and engagement, and we can also bring others into this. And the ones that live there and live through it, they're very good partners to do that as well. That's just a couple of reflections. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead. Yeah. add something?
Thank you. Maybe just add something to the gender violence. That was asked what I heard of it from a different calls we had before. There are different ways of trying to do that. I mean, the online and digital has gained a lot of importance if that is possible, but there are different ways of trying to do that, even with the phones, etc. Though women sometimes also have limitations to access this. Then also in supporting safe houses and places where they can go, but also where they can report. Sometimes innovative ways of reaching out to the household, for example, if there are some food assistance program or direct aid, so that this can also be used with these mobile units of aid provision to then reach out to the women and to have first contact with them. And what Patricia said, also the networks of women, not to underestimate, especially at grassroots, they are sometimes very well connected and know each other closely, so there is also a way to build on that. And last but not least, I think an important element is also the donor engage in dialogue with the government. So if not each of them is acting alone or on their behalf, but really getting together and see what is there and how can we then support this is very important to build a strong response, and it seems to be very important in this context. But it's just a few reflections.
Thank you, Corinne. I want to go back to the field or back to our participants. If there are any other colleagues who would like to address any issue or to provide us with an example. We've seen that there are many challenges, but we have also heard today that there are opportunities. Digitalization is one. We've seen that the pandemic has made the invisible care work done by women more visible. There's also an opportunity there to make our programs and to adapt our programs. The fact that something that I could add at this point is the fact that women in this crisis should not only be seen as victims, but also as very important actors of change. We've talked about participation, and that aspect maybe is also something that when we talk about responses, our responses, how do we make sure that they are part of the answer? I have here a question from Rabat. So I suggest that we go to Rabat to hear what they have to say.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. Guillaume in Rabat. Many thanks for the initiative and for the invitation, and also many thanks for the excellent and quite often inspiring presentations. Just very briefly, modestly in Rabat, we had a quick action basically along three axes. First, in terms of, it's maybe a bit too much to say, but food security, we try to bring an accent on women and girls in our actions and assistance in food security for refugees and the most vulnerable people. We have also helped an NGO very active in domestic violence to have a helpline and also shelter. And thirdly, we are helping an NGO to organize either in presential or virtual conference later in the fall on the post-COVID effect and gender. So we will see where that can lead. I have two or three points basically. The network, I think that's very important, and indeed in my accreditation country we try to enlarge the network of women and men that are active on the topic, to know them, to have a mapping of where they are active and how. But maybe we could also have such a network in Switzerland. Speaking only for Morocco, I know of a lady, Professor Nargis Hilal, that is teaching in Geneva, and she has quite a specific topic where it's artificial intelligence and gender, but she's very much a TEDx talker on gender issues, and might be useful because she knows Switzerland, she knows the country, my country, in my case, Morocco, but this kind of network could be useful also for us to have of expats in Switzerland that are champions of gender. Then on feedbacks, yes, indeed, to bring the field, if I may say so, closer to the multilateral level, the policy level. At the same time, please, I would like to remind us that we are, as embassy and rather small embassies, covering a very broad spectrum of topics. So if you need feedbacks, please feel free to give us a request, but timely and focused. Otherwise, we might not, dare to bring something thinking, oh, maybe it's too late, maybe it's too early, maybe it's not exactly what you need. So don't hesitate to engage us if you think that a specific organization is active in a specific country, or for whatever good reasons you would like, please ask us about a request instead of waiting for feedbacks. I would be happy to oblige. And it's not only a matter of visibility or recognition, but I believe it's also a matter of credibility and having a real impact. I'm just wondering, I will try to say that as simply as I can, but we have indeed an excellent gender strategy. And I think this gender strategy is very broad and is very appropriate for the multilateral level. And at the UN level or the multilateral level, I think we are perceived as champions, are very good at least in the field of gender equality, gender perspective, gender dimension. Now, in the field, I'm wondering if we should not try to sharpen our profile and to be better known for one or for a very few numbers of specific topics. A few have been already named, private sector, women in business, but try to bring our Swiss expertise where Switzerland is recognized already as a leader, be it in the business or for schools, for education, vocational training, maybe political life. A few topics where we could bring gender and our DNA, where we are recognized as a country, because otherwise very often I had the feeling that Switzerland is not immediately perceived as the country for being gender champion like the Nordic countries are, or maybe a few other countries. But and that has to do with the fact that every 3-4 years, depending on the level of interest of the head of mission or the colleague, we focus on this topic or that topic, but to have a more specific pool of topics. Thank you very much. Over to you, Bernard.
Thank you very much, Guillaume, for this input. Definitely very, very important for us. Very important point for us to take away with and to reflect more on, and this is also what we want. So we really appreciate critical thinking and your contribution. Very often here in Bern we lack the field reality. So this meeting is also about that and to bridge these difficulties that we face sometimes. So really very thankful for your contribution on that. We would still have time to take one question or comment. Otherwise, we will move towards concluding the meeting. Tabu would like to have the word, so we are going to DRC, I guess.
Yes, this is Denise Lüthi speaking from East Congo, Bukavu, Corporate. in the region of the Great Lakes. As you all know, the gender issue here is at the forefront of our programs. We have been working almost 20 years now against sexual and gender-based violence through multidimensional programs, starting in the early 2000 years with humanitarian aid interventions, then transforming this into development programs where we support victims of violence or survivors with psychological support, health support, juridic support, and also economic support. We are working with a network of organizations who address the problem. And of course, also we here in the in East Congo and in the region, we have seen that the problem, the violence and discrimination against women is strongly increasing during the COVID crisis. We have, since the COVID crisis started here, risen our efforts to target this problem and raise support to NGOs and partners who are working hard to act against this situation, against these crimes. And I can tell you that we have got tens and tens of applications of active NGOs, well-intended NGOs who want to face this problem and change it. I just would like to draw the attention to one of our big challenges here. We are working in a highly fragile and volatile context due to war situations, security situations, eroded state systems, and this is concerning almost all dimensions of life here. Our big challenges is to bring in a certain sustainability and a systemic change when it comes to the problematic of gender-based violence or discrimination against women. This does not only concern gender issues, it concerns many, many other issues, the sustainability, but as in almost all the fields of life, the women are the first victims when systems fail or when systems are unable to become stable. So what I would like to just put here on the table is that I would encourage, and I'm certainly sure that many things have already been done, but I would like to encourage to have a strong focus on the systemic side of the problem, and this especially also in fragile contexts, and a critical thinking about this double complexity we are facing here: fragility, gender, and durability or systemic change. I close. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bukavu, for having reminded us of the difficulty or the difficulties in which you operate in that part of the world, and also to bring to our attention some of the very specific issues that relate to your work. If I don't have a reaction on this side, definitely points that we take with us. We're going to move towards closing the meeting. I want to thank you again, because we started with moments of empowerment. This is what I take with me from Madame Dancy's speech at the beginning, and I think we need to keep that in mind. And we've seen some challenges, we've seen some opportunities as well, and I think those need also to be reminded. Generally, I think we tend to see that gender issues can be deprioritized in the times of crisis, and this is also the very reason for this meeting. So I want to thank you again for participating. Corinne, do you have anything to add at this point from DETSA?
No, I think I'd just like to thank you all for contributing and listen to all your contributions and also remarks. Maybe also the last one from Denise from Cabo, which is really highlighting the double or sometimes triple complexity, even in contexts that are not in in a violent conflict, sometimes it's difficult when we work in a pandemic situation or in a crisis situation and we try to work on system at the same time. There is sometimes, if you don't have a government who has gender equality at the forefront of the thinking, and then if you are in a crisis, then you have a double challenge, I think, to really work strategically and on the system. So I think we can confirm that observation. But nothing more from my side, just many thanks to you.
Okay, thank you so much. It's probably for me, first thing is that was very enlightening for me. And I take maybe four elements out of this discussion. I try to be very brief and on a high flight altitude. The first thing, and that was already said, is that basically we started this year, 2020, already with the impression that we were losing ground, but nevertheless there were some milestones ahead. The 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration, 20th anniversary of the Resolution 1325, 10 years of UN Women, and many other things to celebrate, and that was all not possible due to COVID. So we still have to make sure that we can basically stop going backwards and try to do this kind of judo thing and try to take the best, or at least those opportunities that every crisis like COVID brings, and make the best of it, or even try to accelerate some of our projects or some of the change that we see. I think we have this responsibility, and that brings me to a second point. Gender issues are, or we have, and that's what we do. That's what is part of our policy, is that we link the gender issues to our overall policy and efforts. And when Guillaume mentioned that we have to focus or to concentrate, that reminds me a lot of the discussions we've had here in Bern, discussing our new development policy, which is basically follows three circles, or the result, if these three circles overlap. It's the needs out there in the world, it's the Swiss interest, and I think that is probably the most interesting ingredient. It's what Switzerland can offer, what Switzerland can probably offer better than others. The third point is the economy and jobs. And what comes along is the necessity to work with private sector, with other actors who can create jobs, or at least who can make sure that the economy is coming back and doing better. That's also one of the main goals of our new development policy, as well as the Tech for Good approach. That has a lot to do with what I've heard now also from you, is that we have to try and to be creative and to take whatever we see of this change, and to make sure that we will not just fall back into old patterns on a lower level, but try to accelerate some of the change, try to move close towards a new, and in many areas, better or more equal reality. I am convinced that this is possible. And here comes probably my fourth and last point. I think the awareness is key. Data is key. We need to know what we are talking about. We need to have what I would call in German belastbare Daten. So we have to know what we know, and we have to know what we don't know, and we have to be sure as good as it gets. And then this awareness needs to insight, and that should in the end need to action. I mean, everything that we know we should do and all the analysis we do is in the end probably even frustrating for some of the people if we cannot translate all of this into action. And that is where I again want to thank especially the two or the four colleagues from the field when I heard that everything we know and we do and we make possible will then turn into action and make the situation better, at least in many places. One of these actions or leading by example, and it's just something that comes in my mind, is the fact that for the first time here in the history of the FDFA in Bern, we have a female colleague at the top of the development agency, but also a female majority in the governing body of the FDFA, with 4 against 3, if I put it like this, at the top of the EDA. And that is also, in the end, it's the result of, you always need to have a minister and a government that is not just letting it happen, but is actively looking for qualified women and then leading by example. I got a letter from DIP, one of our Gewerkschaften here, and they asked for more action, and I told them, look, we have on the level of the FDFA, we have now this situation, and we have some directorates which have quite a good situation, and we have others. And now I invite also my colleagues from the different interest groups to approach all levels and make sure that people follow the example. And that would be then the proof that we can make a difference in our own sphere of influence. I try it as good as it gets on my level as in the General Secretariat, but also as part of the leading team of the FDFA. So I want to close this webinar or this seminar by thanking again the panelists, my organizing colleagues, and I want to give a special thank to IT EDA. I think it's kind of a first, it is a premiere that we were a bit reluctant to accept more than 100. I think the test shows that 100 is okay. Next time we will do it with 200 or 250. We will see. But I hope this is not the last time we organize a seminar like this. So it was also for me very good and nice to hear some of any familiar voices from New York, from Rabat, and from other places, and some new voices from all over the world too. So I want to thank you very, very much, and I wish you a good day. Take care, stay healthy, and all the best. Thank you so much.
Vielen Dank, schönen Abend noch. Wiederhören.
Gleichfalls.
Merci vielmals, schönen Abend.